The process was never supposed to look like this. When Sam Hinkie coined that phrase and built the philosophical foundation of what the Philadelphia 76ers were attempting across those tank years, the vision was a team constructed through the draft, built from the ground up, assembled piece by piece through patience and suffering and the accumulated misery of consecutive losing seasons that would eventually produce the talent required to compete for a championship. Nobody in that room imagined the process would end with LeBron James signing for essentially the veteran's minimum. Jaylen Brown arriving via one of the most lopsided trades in recent memory, and a starting five that might be the most talented collection of individual players assembled on a single roster in the modern era of the sport. But here we are, the 76ers have arrived, and the question is no longer whether Philadelphia is a serious championship contender. The question is whether this specific construction of talent, with all its synergistic complications and all its defensive vulnerabilities and all its spacing questions, can actually translate the extraordinary ceiling it possesses into the sustained excellence required to win 4 playoff series against the best teams in the NBA. The answer, when you examine every layer of what Philadelphia has built this summer, is genuinely complicated in the most exciting possible way. Start with how this roster actually came together, because the front office transformation that preceded these moves is as significant as the moves themselves. Daryl Morey is gone. Bob Myers is in charge of reshaping the front office, and Mike Gansey is running basketball operations. The first major decision this new leadership structure made was to turn Paul George, 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks, into Jaylen Brown, a 29-year-old Finals MVP who was still right in the middle of his prime, arriving to play alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey before LeBron was even part of the conversation. That trade alone would have represented one of the most significant roster improvements of the offseason for any franchise. The 76ers then added Anthony Simons on a team-friendly deal, bringing in a scorer capable of running a second unit independently for extended stretches who averaged better than 19 points per game in his final season in Portland. Dean Wade came in as a defensive and versatility piece from Cleveland. LeBron Phelan was drafted 22nd overall, despite multiple draft analysts projecting him as a top 20 talent. The cracks were being filled intelligently and efficiently before the headline move changed the entire conversation. Then LeBron James agreed to join all of it for essentially the veteran's minimum, $8 million across 2 seasons with a player option on the second year. We'll contextualize that number. Anthony Simons coming off the bench costs more per year. New Orleans just gave DeAndre Jordan 2 years and $7.9 million fully guaranteed after Jordan appeared in only 12 games last season. The NBA's all-time leading scorer just agreed to terms that are roughly equivalent to what a player who barely plays receives in fully guaranteed money. Philadelphia is getting close to $75 million worth of talent for pennies on the dollar across the LeBron and KCP additions combined. KCP took a buyout from Memphis to join, going from $21.6 million on his previous contract to $3.9 million with the 76ers. The era of pay cuts has genuinely arrived, and Philadelphia is exploiting it more aggressively and successfully than any franchise in the league. The recruiting piece deserves recognition because it reflects something important about the environment. Myers and Gansey have built in a very short time. Embiid, Maxey, and Brown were all actively recruiting LeBron. Myers himself pulled up to Rich Paul's podcast to make the case for Philadelphia as a destination. When a front office executive goes directly onto a player's agent's media platform to sell the vision, that reflects a different kind of institutional flexibility and willingness to do whatever is required to win. The approach worked. LeBron chose Philadelphia. KCP followed. The gravitational pull of what the 76ers are building is already attracting talent beyond what the financial structure would normally suggest was possible. Now the basketball. Because this is where the story gets both most exciting and most complicated simultaneously. The starting 5 of Maxey, VJ Edgecombe, Jaylen Brown, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid might be the most talented 5 players on a single roster in the NBA right now, potentially 4 top 25 players sharing a court simultaneously. The offensive ceiling that combination represents is almost incomprehensible when you think through the matchup problems it creates for any opposing defensive scheme. Who guards LeBron when Maxey and Brown are already occupying the attention of the defense's best perimeter defenders? Who takes Embiid when a smaller lineup is deployed to handle the backcourt threats? The answer in both cases is that there is no clean answer, and that absence of clean answers is what makes this group so potentially devastating in the half-court. LeBron at 41 is not the same player who terrorized defenses in Cleveland or Miami or his first incarnation in Los Angeles. That reality needs to be stated honestly rather than ignored in the excitement of the moment. His fluidity and explosiveness from a standstill have declined. His pull-up shooting is less reliable than it was in his peak years. His catch-and-shoot three-point percentage dropped to 33% last season. his worst in years, which created real spacing problems in a Lakers system built around Luka's spread pick-and-roll game that required LeBron to function as a floor spacer. He's not going to be asked to carry a primary offensive load across 82 regular season games, and that is actually the most important structural fact about how this team is built. With Maxey and Brown as the primary ball handlers and offensive initiators, LeBron's role shifts to the kind of complementary genius that his basketball intelligence allows him to excel in even as his athleticism diminishes. He becomes the connective tissue of the offense, the screener who rolls with devastating efficiency because his combination of size, timing, and finishing ability at the rim makes him impossible to ignore in those situations. The off-ball mover who reads defensive rotations and attacks the space created by Maxey's driving ability or Brown's isolation game. The half-court orchestrator who, when Maxey and Brown rest simultaneously, can run a jokey-adjacent style of play from the pinch post, finding mismatches, setting up action, and making the quick decisions that keep an offense functioning at a high level even when the primary weapons are off the floor. The Maxey dimension of this construction is particularly interesting analytically because the addition of LeBron and Brown changes his role in ways that could actually enhance his effectiveness rather than limiting it. Maxey has been one of the most valuable turnover-suppressing ball handlers in the entire league, and has carried a massive offensive load because the supporting cast required it. Now, with the ball in LeBron's hands or Brown's hands more frequently, Maxey becomes one of the most dangerous off-ball players in basketball. His spot-up shooting at 40% from deep behind the line, his ability to attack closeouts with first-step explosiveness that very few guards can match, his movement shooting off screens where he has shown genuine flashes of elite capability. All of these qualities become significantly more impactful when he is not asked to also shoulder the primary ball-handling burden. The comparison to the LeBron and Kyrie dynamic in Cleveland is apt. Neither can handle the ball. They can run two-man game with either screening. Defenses cannot tilt fully toward one without the other destroying the rotation. Jaylen Brown's fit is the question that requires the most honest examination. Brown is fundamentally a ball-dominant player whose best basketball has come when he is the primary or co-primary option, either initiating in high pick-and-roll situations or operating in isolation. When he has been reduced to spotting up and playing off creation in his Boston years, his impact was measurably less significant. The questions about whether he can genuinely adapt to a complementary role alongside LeBron and Maxey without the offensive ownership he has thrived with are legitimate and will not be answered until we see the actual lineups functioning together under playoff pressure. The best version of Brown in this construction, and this is the analytical argument that the 76ers coaching staff will be making internally, is one where his defensive versatility and physicality become the primary contribution and his offensive role is specific rather than broad. If he can lean into being the defensive anchor on the perimeter, the player who takes the opposing team's best wing scorer and physically punishes them for 40 minutes, while still contributing 20 or so points per game in a more defined set of offensive situations, this team becomes significantly more dangerous than if he is trying to be everything he was in Boston. The defensive picture is where the honest analysis has to acknowledge the genuine concerns. Embiid's mobility has declined to a point where his interior defense, once among the most imposing in basketball, is now more about size and positioning than active playmaking and vertical presence. He cannot move his feet consistently enough to guard in space, and he is no longer the shot-blocking force that made him such a unique defensive asset in his prime years. LeBron at 41 is a smart defensive player who makes good rotations and understands schemes, but asking him to be a secondary rim protector or to cover ground consistently in help situations is a significant ask. A starting lineup of Maxey, Edgecombe, Brown, LeBron, and Embiid forces virtually no turnovers. Their deflection and steal numbers as individual players last season were not at the level required to compensate for the other defensive limitations in the group. The bench construction partially addresses these concerns and is where the 76ers show genuine intelligence in how they have built around the star core. Dean Wade is one of the more versatile defensive forwards in the league with great hands and rebounding ability. Justin Edwards brings length and the capacity to force turnovers. Dominic Barlow offers defensive versatility at the 4 or small ball 5. Avdija and Ariel Huporti provide shot-blocking presence when required. The depth and versatility are real. The problem is not the bench. The problem is fielding one elite defensive 5 that can close games against the Knicks or the Pacers or whichever Eastern Conference powerhouse Philadelphia eventually faces in May and June.
Embiid's health is the single biggest variable in the entire calculation. Everything Philadelphia wants to run in the playoffs is built on Embiid being available and physically capable of performing at the level his talent allows. His health history makes that assumption genuinely fragile. The backup center situation, with Bona providing energy 5 contributions and Huporti offering some rim protection, is not sufficient insurance for a team whose championship aspirations depend so heavily on Embiid being upright. The parallel to what happened against the Knicks, where Karl Anthony Towns exploited the perimeter mobility limitations of Philadelphia's frontcourt and they never found an adequate answer, will be the blueprint every serious opponent studies when preparing to face this team. Getting a backup center capable of guarding in space, a Daniel Gafford type, is the one remaining roster move that would genuinely complete what they are building. But step back and look at the full picture of where this franchise has come from, because the trust the process journey demands that context. Those tank years produced Embiid and Simmons and eventually Maxey. The subsequent years of roster construction and deconstruction, the Ben Simmons saga, the Paul George experiment, Daryl Morey's departure and the front office reset, all of it has been the iterative process of a franchise trying to find the right combination of talent and fit around Embiid's extraordinary but fragile gifts. The arrival of Myers and Gansey, the Brown trade that immediately reset the competitive ceiling, and then LeBron choosing Philadelphia for the veterans minimum represents the culmination of everything that process was always trying to build toward. Not the specific players Hinkie envisioned. Not the timeline anyone projected. But the destination was always a championship-caliber roster surrounding Embiid with the talent required to win in May and June. The league should take Philadelphia seriously in a way that goes beyond the obvious observation that a roster with potentially 4 top 25 players is talented. The specific threat they pose is the transition potential. 3 of last season's top 4 teams in transition scoring possessions per game now reside in Philadelphia, and VJ Edgecombe, himself an elite transition player, has not even been added to that calculation yet. If this team can generate the defensive stops and live rebounds required to push pace, they could become the most devastating transition team in the league with a cast of athletes who can each individually hurt you before the defense sets. The challenge is creating those possessions, which circles back to the defensive and rebounding concerns. But when the transition offense is flowing, the ceiling of what this group can produce in a single game is genuinely frightening. Nick Nurse is the coaching variable that the analytical community tends to underweight in discussions about this team. He is one of the most creative and flexible tactical minds in basketball. His ability to construct specific lineup combinations for specific opponents, to identify the matchups where each of his players is most dangerous and to put them in those situations with intelligent offensive design, will determine whether the talent on this roster translates into the kind of cohesive playoff basketball that wins championships. The growing pains early in the season are inevitable. A new star added at the last moment, 3 ball-dominant players learning to share offensive ownership, a defensive system that needs to compensate for specific limitations while maximizing specific strengths. None of that resolves itself immediately. But by the time the playoffs arrive, if Nurse has had 5 or 6 months to build the habits and the spacing and the defensive communication, the team that shows up in April could look significantly different from the team that opens the season in October. The trust the process philosophy was always about delayed gratification. About accumulating the right pieces even when the immediate results were painful. About believing that the suffering of the tank years was justified by the championship ceiling that sufficiently elite talent would eventually produce. Every bad season, every lottery pick, every disappointed fanbase moment across those years was in service of arriving at a position where the franchise had the assets and the talent to build something genuinely special. Philadelphia has arrived at that position. The starting 5 might be the most talented in basketball. The depth is real and intelligently constructed. The front office transformation has produced results almost immediately. LeBron James, the greatest player in NBA history by the measure of accumulated production, chose this team and this city at the end of his career because he believes this is where the final chapter of his story leads to something historic. Embiid needs to stay healthy. The defensive questions need answers. The offensive fit needs time and coaching to reach its potential. The spacing concerns around certain lineups are real and will create genuine problems in specific matchups. None of that is guaranteed to resolve perfectly. But the process that started in those tank years, that generated so much suffering and so much criticism and so much mockery, was always leading somewhere. And right now, for the first time since that journey began, Philadelphia looks like a team that could actually get there. The process may finally be complete. The ring, after all of it, might genuinely be next.